For many of us, David Clowney is a sort of like very well-known and sort of beloved figure. He was professor of philosophy in our department for 30 plus years. I think he hired many of us in the room, and is sort of, you know, someone who's been a beloved and valued colleague for a long time. David's sort of area of specialization, which is going to be concerned by this talk, are principally virtue ethics and environmental philosophy. And this talk's going to sort of marry both of those things. He has worked, this is, I think, the last chapter, or kind of more like a sort of comprendu of a book that he has just, manuscript that he's just completed, and he's working on getting publisher's arrangements sort of settled with that. But we've been hearing about this book for a long time now, and actually a number of earlier theorizing talks have presented material from earlier chapters. So we're very excited to sort of see where this ends. And I would like to ask you all to join me in welcoming Professor Clowney as he tells us about what you and I can do about the global environmental crisis. Thank you.
Thank you folks very much. If you can't hear me toward the back of the room, please move forward, because I've had recent vocal surgery, and if I talk too loud, it will not work very well and I'll run out of steam. This is about as loud as it's safe for me to talk, and if you can hear me, I'm glad. This is, I think, my 6th theorizing talk. Every single talk that I've given in this series has been about my work, one stage or another, in this book. I do have another discipline, aesthetics, but this is mainly the environmental ethics. And kudos to Ed for starting the series and keeping it going all these years, getting better and better, when for the first many years of his doing it, he was an adjunct that we couldn't hire permanently, though we wanted to. And thank goodness he is now part of the permanent part of the Rowan department and faculty. And the book, as I say, is out for review by publishers right now, and I'm hoping to hear back soon about what they want me to do with it, whether they want it at all. I think they do, but we'll see. You know, a year and a half, it should be out. But meanwhile, I'm going to be teaching an honors section of environmental ethics using that book as the text, my draft of it. So if any of you are interested in that course, if you're in the honors section, please, in the honors program, please consider it. And if you're not, well, maybe later on there might be the opportunity to get in. We'll see. Talk to Nathan. According to this poster, I'm going to tell you what you and I can do about our environmental crisis. That is a tall order. We'll see how I do with it, but I'll be passing along things that I've learned in writing this book. I hope they help. Let's start by looking at the crisis. Here it is, a picture of the crisis. It doesn't look very scary, does it? It's a view out the window of my Philadelphia apartment. And it doesn't look like a crisis until you start seeing it as a snapshot of what has to change if we're going to fend the crisis off, which is basically everything. And we have to transform it quickly, without doing more harm than good, into a naturally sustainable form of human living. And it's all intersected and interconnected and alive and moving like fury. What do you see? Well, there's the Schuylkill River, the lovelier of Philly's 2 rivers, and one of those which, after being purified, along with water from the Delaware, supplies Philly's water needs. There's a lovely trail along here. Lots of people walk, ride, and bark. Dogs too, but also bike along that trail. And you can see cars and trucks crawling along 2 intersecting interstates and along access roads and parked, most of them burning fossil fuels. Here's 30th Street Station, a hub for Amtrak Railroad and for SEPTA's regional electric rail system. The Amtrak Northeast Corridor is the only electric intercity railroad system in the country. It runs all the way, from Boston down to Florida and up into Maine, really. And it's great that it's electric, but it's a mess. It's underfunded, understaffed, and it's running on an electrical system that's a holdover from the very beginning of the 20th century when they were electrifying trains, and it's completely different from anything else, and it would cost billions to replace it. And of course, it's been turned into a private company and is not, or never was adopted by the government. So there we have it. You can also see right up here the Philadelphia Electric Company. And I see that little sign which blinks on at rush hour in the evening and stays on until 9 o'clock the next morning. Time, temperature, community notices of all kinds of things. I always know what Memorial Month it is from looking up there. And lots and lots of pico brags about what a fine community organization it is. Guess how much of their power they get from solar? Guess.
0%.
Pardon me?
0%.
Well, you're not quite right, but you're mighty close. 0.5% from solar. Put together with all other renewables, and not counting nuclear, 7% of the energy pico supplies comes from renewables. About 30% comes from nuclear, and 60% or more comes from fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. I can tell you more about leaning on pico to do more later. But also, I'm not talking about trains. Let me go back here. There's other rail lines going through here and long trains of freight and tank cars carrying oil and so on, running through the city all the time. Always a risk of a derailment and spillage and all that stuff. You see big shiny buildings. There. This, the Cira Center, we often call it the Amtrak building because it's on Amtrak land, but Amtrak leased it to Brandywine Development to put up this big fancy building so they could make some money off their land because they need it. It's occupied by big financial players and lawyers like BlackRock, McKinsey, Deckert, and so on. The FMC building over here, it's not Ford Motor Company, it's Food Machinery Corporation. And what they get to put their name on it, they don't own it. Brandywine Realty put that one up too. But they occupy more than half of it, so they get to put their name on it. What do? They make pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and related products. So we've got big ag over here. And it's a mixed-use building, and the Cira building, Cira 2 over here, is residential. But the mixed use has, apartments, relatively expensive condos in it. And also, so far, you've got a lot of the other buildings are housing as well. And some of them are also mixed use. So you've got big grocery stores. You can't see them here, but Giant and Trader Joe's and Whole Foods are all within walking distance of this apartment, and they're all first and second floor maybe of mixed-use buildings with condos and offices on top maybe. So so far we've got housing, food, transportation, energy, business, finance. What about government? Well, over here is a building that used to be the post office, and now it's the IRS. Now what else do we need? Well, what about education and health? Over here, you can't see it really there, but it says Drexel up there. So there's Drexel over here, and of course Penn, which is a city by itself. And they're on both sides of the river. And Penn and Drexel both have medical schools. And the Penn hospital system is a city within a city, and Children's Hospital, CHOP, also 21% of workers in Philadelphia of any sort work in healthcare. It's a huge healthcare center. And you don't see much about sports except at night, the buildings will light up with the signs for the Phillies and the Giants and the Flyers and, the Eagles. Not a sports fan here, you can tell. But sports is big in Philadelphia, and the arts are big in Philadelphia too. Only reason you don't see it here in this picture is that we're on the river-facing side of this west tower here, which is my apartment building. No, it isn't. That's the south end, the one you're looking out of. We're on the river side, and the other side is the Parkway side. And then you could see the Philadelphia Art Museum, and the Barnes, and the Rodin, and the new Calder Museum going up right on the other side of the street. So, and walk down the Parkway and jog a little bit, you get to Verizon Hall and so on. Very artsy place to live, and I'm happy with it, very happy. Now, why have I spent so much time, you may be wondering this, on this one picture? Because the way of life that is there, in which we are all involved in some way or another, or in something connected with it, is extractive. It burns fossil fuels. It uses up planetary resources. It is causing the environmental crisis. Our way of life, right here, is what causes the crisis. And it's complex. Not everybody, not every institution is grabbing more from nature and from people than nature and people have got to give, and dumping more into the waste sink than nature and people can absorb. Significant forces are pushing in the opposite direction, but not nearly enough. So this is a complex crisis, and it is systemic. Cities consume 78% of the energy we humans use. Do we get rid of them? Blow them up? Go out and live like bears? Eat nuts and berries in the woods? Not possible, even if we wanted to do it, which we don't. We have to transform this. We've got to get them producing way less emissions, and we need them. Because if we don't live together more densely, there's no room for nature. And we have to figure out how to do that without crowding each other and driving each other nuts, which we're very good at doing. So cities need to change. Now, I just want to run through some of the faces of the crisis and try to do it quickly because I want to get to some other things, and you, I think, are pretty familiar with it, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded of the fact that we've got climate change and more severe storms. Swannanoa here is in North Carolina, and my sister lives just a couple of miles from there. Fortunately, she and all her family are fine, but we couldn't even get in touch with her for quite a while. It's a mess. And you see all the others. Rising sea levels, drowning island nations, and so on. And more climate refugees. We'll come to that. Biodiversity loss. Species. Ecosystems. All going downhill. And no, I'm not going to add quotes, but the crisis is just as bad as the climate crisis. And they're not the same. Climate change does drive biodiversity loss, but many other factors do as well. And we're pulling out the rug from under our own feet by killing biodiversity. The hydrological cycle is out of whack. I only knew this when learned this when I was making this talk. But there's green water and blue water. And the green water is what goes into the soil, up into the plants, and is evaporated back into the air. And it's a big chunk of the water that goes up into the clouds. And then the blue water comes down as rain or as ice on snow or whatever, and runs down into the ocean or into groundwater. The groundwater levels are being tapped dry. They're falling. The cities on top of them are sinking into the ground. And yet, as drought comes along because of climate change, farmers pump more water out of the ground in order to keep growing and making money and so on. Soil degradation. Drought, but also erosion and chemical fertilizers killing the soil because the soil's alive. It's got all sorts of little critters in it. Millions and millions, maybe even billions per square inch or something, some unbelievable number of microorganisms that keep digesting what comes into the soil and makes it alive for growing plants. Put all those chemicals in it, and it dies quickly. Pollution, that there is somebody in a scuba suit. It's not trash, it's somebody swimming through the Pacific Gyre, leaving that open part behind. So you know about these things. Waste, likewise. Here's biggest waste pile in the world. I forget where it is. I think it's in India. And what's this down here? Can you tell? It's a child who, along with other children, is burning the rubber or the plastic off of copper wire so that the copper can be recycled. And meanwhile, as you can see, inhaling the toxic fumes. Which is, by itself, a pretty good example of environmental injustice. But this little story tells it too. There are these little metallic nodules on the bottom of the sea, which include rare metals. They form kind of like pearls somehow when things fall down. I forget the process. But folks have talked about mining them as a source for lithium and other such things. Lots of people are resisting that too, as well they might, because you get, big machines trawling along the bottom, scraping stuff up. What happens to the life down there? And at the same time, there's this demand for having this resource, and this United Nations agency, the International Seabed Authority, decided that, or made a rule that the least developed countries should have access to this. Some of the ocean floor should be set aside to be theirs to mine, and they should get help because they wouldn't know how to do it. But that would, then they'd be able to benefit from it instead of everybody always stealing resources from them or away from them, like we always do. So that was set up. And of course, somebody immediately comes along to game the system. Collaboration between a Canadian company, Canadian Metals Company, and the United States, which has not signed on to the treaty, to the law of the sea, like we just keep not signing on to anything that we think everybody else should adhere to. And so they recruit Mara and Tonga, these tiny little islands, because they fit the description. And, we'll give you something if you'll sign on to this. Okay, so they've submitted a petition, and result, if approved by Congress, it hasn't gone through yet, Tonga and Canadian Metals builds a great big plant in Texas and makes billions or many millions. And Tonga and Mara get a little piece. Lovely. Okay. It's a life and death crisis. And I could go on for a week telling about all the deadly consequences of it. But immediately affecting, or very closely, almost affecting my family, 200 dead in the Asheville area from Helene, 17 from Milton in Florida, and 13.7 million environment-related deaths every year, according to the World Health Organization. The 3.2 million, you subtract, that this is out of order, but you should subtract the 3.2 million from the 13.7 if you think that indoor cooking fire smoke should not count as environmental harm in the same way that harm from global warming and other such causes. But of course, if you bring environmental justice into the picture, then it does, because why are people cooking over those smoky fires indoors? Because they don't have access to other ways to cook that work for them. So again, human self-sabotage, except that it's not even, because the people who are getting sabotaged are mostly not the people who have caused the problem. And there have been some, excuse me a minute, there have been some half measures toward fixing things. The Paris Agreement, great. The Conference of the Parties meetings that happen every year, some progress gets made, not much, especially when they're held in, hosted by oil-rich countries that are pumping it out and selling it. The infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act that the Biden administration managed to get through, very big, very significant environmental pluses in there. And China, while burning more coal than anybody else on the planet is doing right now, is also moving very rapidly to more and more renewables, making a great big push. They will corner the market on electric vehicles unless, well, I think they probably just will. But in any case, all right, why aren't we doing any better? Is it a technical problem? A little bit, but not really. because we've already got enough technology to do what we need to do now. And if we really dug into doing it, the other technology would come along even faster than it is now. Are we distracted by other crises? Sure. And some of them are caused by environmental factors, at least partly or almost entirely, and some not. They're big ones. They need attention. The war in Ukraine, the horrible war between Israel and Palestinians in Hamas, and following Hamas's horrible attack, but much greater in proportion. And lots of other things to be worried about too. But including our polarization. But the real problem isn't just, oh, we had to drop everything to go take care of this other thing. It's a moral problem. We know that it's a real problem. We know we're doing it. We know how to stop it without doing more harm than good, though we fool ourselves into thinking that we don't know that. And we're just taking baby steps and not really digging in. And that's a classic definition, as far as I'm concerned, of the moral problem. But it's a funny one, because it's a collective problem. It's a problem with our extractive, capitalist, consumer way of life, which is the way of life all of us in the global north are embedded in to some extent, especially in the USA. And it's also the richest in the global south, though not most of those who live there. They are embedded in the sense that they're, well, they're not reaping the benefits, they're reaping the consequences and putting out the labor. So we're extracting their labor as well as the resources from those places. And in the words of Bush the First, the American lifestyle is not negotiable. That is, we're not going to move from that because we don't want to. Here's a comparison of the American lifestyle compared to others in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, excluding land use emissions having to do with deforestation and some other things like that. We go from the very lowest, which is, I forget how much that is. Looks like it's about 25. No, not even that. Looks like it's about 15 or something. And that's the lowest 50%. And then the middle 40% is here. The next 9% here. And the top 1% are way over here. But all together, we emit so much more than the rest of the world. Now the UN puts out an emissions gap report every now and then, which tells us how big the gap is between what the nations of the world promise to do and what we're actually doing. And I'm looking for the stats here, but we emit twice as much as Europeans, and way more than anybody else in the world. If we did what we need to do, we would be down to 2.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions per year for everybody on the planet by 2030. And by 2050, we'd be down to 0.7 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions per capita for everybody on the planet. And that would take everybody in this room, certainly me, down to 1/10 at least, maybe more than that, of my footprint. It's right up here, sure. So what about that? Can we do it? Individually, not a chance. This is why I'm saying don't drink the footprint Kool-Aid. How many of you here have done that little footprint exercise of figuring out how much? Yeah, right. It's a good tool. It does tell you what your lifestyle, your participation in lifestyle, what impact it does have on the climate. And since we all need to be living that way anyway, there's no harm in starting. But as Michael Mann points out in The New Climate War, BP funded that work by Mathis and Wackernagel because it individualizes the problem and dumps it in our laps and gets them off the hook so they can keep extracting fossil fuels and selling them to us. And it makes the problem insoluble because you can't solve a systemic problem just by aggregating individual disconnected actions. It just doesn't work. The problem is unrestrained growth. And everybody, not just too much growth, but growth period. Everybody thinks the economy has to keep growing at something around 3% a year, or it's not healthy. And all the media, left, right, center, how's the economy doing? And one thing they're talking about is, they always put it in terms of jobs and so on, but basically it's how much are we producing and consuming? So that's a problem. But the way the growth happens, I think it has to stop, period, but that's another question. But the way it happens is that it enriches a small number of people and extracts that wealth from everybody else and from nature. But now, how can a system be immoral? I don't want to get into too much detail about this because I want to get to what we can actually do. But what I want to say is just this. Systems are just you and me in various, very complex, extended back through time, relationships, structures, institutions. Is this what you mean, Ed, when you're always telling me I don't talk about institutions? And I thought institutions were organizations, but apparently there's a distinction between institutions and organizations, which is this, that the organizations are the people in the group organized in a certain way. The institutions are the structures of organization that prevail in a society or in that group of institutions. We finally got on the same page about this, and yes, that's the problem. That is absolutely the problem. So a system can be immoral because systems just are us in all of that. And so if we're the only moral agents here, the fundamental moral agents, so if we're going to, it can only make sense to ascribe moral properties to institutions and systems because our agency is somehow involved. But it's involved in a complicated way that you cannot get to by just aggregating all the individual actions that we do. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about collective character. And I'm not going to get into a whole thing about what character and virtues are right now because we won't get to the rest of what I want to say. If we can talk about it in the discussion. But ask how you are connected to the system. And that's your entree into what you can do about it. Because systems change, and they change because people change them. We are networks of individuals. That's what a system is. And not just networks of individuals, but networks of networks of networks of individuals, groups and so on. And communicative networks. We receive signals, we amplify or modify or squash them, and we send signals out. And groups do the same. I'm focusing on character because I don't want to focus just on particular actions, but the whole way the system works and the whole way we work, individually too, and also in smaller groups together. Because it's not just, oh, you ought to do this, you shouldn't do that, this will give you a better result, this will give you a worse result, but it's about what motivates us, what do we care about, what's the best life for us to live. And your character is not your personality. Okay. You build it over time. So the first thing you need to do is to recognize your influence, because through that network you have influence. And the second thing you need to do is to know who you are and be true to yourself. Because we are social beings. We become selves at all by turning around and looking at ourselves and being able to internalize the regard of others. That happens at around the age 2. Throughout our lives, we internalize, we seek the regard of others, and we internalize the values of other groups, and we're parts of many groups, so we have multiple identities. Walt Whitman says, I contain multitudes. And whatever group you're in at the time, whatever group you're identifying with at the time, you got that hat on, and you will react as a member of that group. And if you put a different hat on, you'll react differently. And some social scientists I've been reading have shown that in many experiments. So, but nevertheless, you are, as you, somebody unique. You are a gift to the world. I don't mean that arrogantly, because it's just that you have a particular contribution to make, and you need to know what it is, because you have to develop that and listen to what others say, but resist their pressures to be something else because of their expectations and what they want. And you need others, and they need you. So you need to be in groups to make a difference. You need to keep educating yourself about the crisis. You need to dream big. And I'm going to read you Gus Speth's dream. I'm very sorry that I seem to have put the wrong, a previous version of this show up there because But Gus Speth, from the Democracy Collaborative, which you should definitely know about, was the former dean of the Yale Forestry School. And here is his dream for what things should look like. The lifeblood of the dominant enterprise type is not profit and growth, but public benefit, social purpose, and a decent living for those involved, while the ownership and control of productive enterprise has shifted decisively to workers, the public, and economic democracy generally. Secondly, the imperative to protect the planet and its climate, and the need to restore the environment back to health, governs economic enterprise and government action. An ethos of nature as a commons for the shared benefit of all life replaces the practice of privatized resource extraction with benefits hoarded by the few and the costs borne by the many, usually the poorest and most marginalized. I live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There's a Commonwealth of Virginia, one of Massachusetts, and one of Tennessee. Nobody thinks it means anything but a state. But it could mean something quite different. Investments are made in accordance with democratically determined priorities, with shareholders replaced by stakeholders, and with social and environmental returns taking priority over financial ones. The aim of economic policy is no longer tied to growth of GDP, but to promote national and international well-being and the common good. Equal justice truly exists for all people in all spheres of life, and reparative justice to address the historic and continuing damage caused by systemic racism is core to the work of ensuring that the benefits of economic activity are widely and equitably shared. And popular sovereignty, that is, democratic government of, by, and for the people, is restored, concomitant with the expansion of democracy into the economy, reversing the takeover of government by the corporate sector. Now let's see what's still on this slide, on this show. Oh yeah, take some depolarization training. Learn how to talk to people that differ from you, respectfully listening, and not with an agenda of trying to change their minds, but with an agenda of understanding them. And you do that respectfully for a while, or you work together in some activity like disaster relief and get to know each other. And then they may want to listen to what you believe and what you value and what you care about. And you can share that non-judgmentally, and you might find something you collaborate on. Well, we'll come back to Optum and Adapt. You can ask me about it in a minute here. What else to do? Vote. For goodness sakes, vote. Never been a more important time to do it. And know that your vote matters, not just because it adds another number, but because of the science of influence. That out to 3 degrees of separation, whatever you do influences others. Others in your networks will be at 1 degree of separation, 45% more likely to have traits that you have. At 2 degrees, 25% more likely. At 3 degrees, 10%. That's from Christakis and Fowler's study of the spread of obesity in networks. But the same pattern shows up for voting behavior in the study of the 2008 election. And it shows up all over the place. It's a little more complicated than that, but know that when you vote, especially when you tell people that you voted, others will vote too. And you'll have influence beyond anybody you actually know. So it's not just you, it's a whole bunch of other people that vote because you voted, and likewise vote for a person because you voted for that person and they were influenced. Yeah, maybe. But don't just vote. That's just the beginning. Lobby. Hold your elected representatives accountable. Educate yourself. Know what the issues are. Know what the pressures are on them. Go talk to them. I've lobbied for years. I haven't done it more recently. I've worked with a different organization, but with a Citizens Climate Lobby. And they go to Congress, to the Hill, twice a year now, in teams of 5, lobbying every single congressional office, politely, finding something, it's sometimes very hard to do, to thank the elected representative for, listening, and then making their pitch for a program, a plan to price carbon or whatever it is that CCL is working on. And they have been extremely effective in getting legislation through. Canvas. Go out and talk to people. Protest. Write letters to the editor. Post on social media. Run for office. And these two organizations that I've got up there are organizations that I have been part of one way or another, and both are very effective in getting things done. I want to go to, when I say join with others to build community, I'm not just talking about, I am talking about having community with each other, which means really going deep with each other and learning to trust each other, and learning how much difference a group can accept and be effective in what it wants to do, and learning how to get things done when you differ. But even more than that, by building community, I mean building something that looks like what I just read to you from Gus Speth. And there are examples of it in the world. The biggest one that I know, and in the other slideshow I've got great pictures of this place, but it's the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation in the Basque region of Spain. It employs 80,000 people all around the world, and a smaller number of those, but a big number, are cooperators in about 80 co-ops, maybe 90, in the Basque region, most of which are industrial production cooperatives, which supply parts to companies all over the world. They have their own university. They have their own research center. They have a retail arm, which is the biggest company, the biggest hyper and supermarket chain in Spain, I believe. They have their own social security system. They now depend partly on Spain's, but they add to it. They have guaranteed retirement. There's no unemployment because the workers own the company. And the gap between the wages of the lowest paid cooperator in any of the co-ops and the highest paid cooperator in any of the co-ops is at most 1 to 9. The average is, I think, 6 or 5 even. And the president of the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation only makes 7 times what the lowest paid worker makes. They have no outside investors. They call themselves capitalists, but I don't consider them capitalist because they are missing what to me is the crucial element of capitalism, which is not business, it's not markets, it's not even profits of a sort. It's outside investors scraping off wealth from the people who do the work and the people who provide the resources so they can add up more and more wealth of their own. All of the money that comes in from whatever Mondragon co-ops make supports the particular co-op and goes also to the center, and some comes off the top to fund social goods as approved by the cooperators. They finance it. They're self-financing. They have a public bank, because a public bank is a bank owned by the people who put the money there and making decisions about what it will invest in that are determined by what they determine is a social good. So that's an example of a system that is complex, has all those elements I described in that initial picture. It's modern, it's not living out in the woods, and they've got a big push on right now to really be sustainable. And they'll do it, because when they set their minds to something, they do it. They've got solidarity with each other. That's my conclusion, and it's time for some Q&A. I ran over. I'm sorry.
I mean, historically, this is actually not bad.
Thank you. Ed.
Running over. All right, so this was fascinating. It has all kinds of implications. There's theoretical parts that he flashed through very quickly that you might want to ask him about, or I think some of the practical stuff. So who's got questions?
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. It's not so much a question about your theory, but a personal question, I guess. So you're from Pennsylvania. I'm sure you're familiar with the Jersey Shore. Yeah. I wonder if you had any thoughts about the wind turbine proposal in Ocean City.
About the what?
Wind turbines that they want to put in on the Ocean City.
I do. I haven't studied that particular thing in as much depth as I'd like. No pun intended, but I'm for it because I think that wind is essential, and that getting big turbines out there, well-built ones that will withstand whatever pressures they might face, is essential. I mean, we have to get way more renewables functioning than now. Even if we cut back and go into degrowth in the global north, which I think we really need to do for justice and also for environmental benefit, we're still going to need all that power. And I guess, the objections are people think it'll spoil the view or something like that.
Aside from other complications, but that's one of them, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's my initial reaction. But I'd want to listen to the people who are objecting instead of going in and saying, "Oh no, you bad people, you need to do this," because, and that's where Optum and Adapt come in. This is from Brian Norton, the pragmatist philosopher who's so good on sustainability. Writes too much uses too many words, but nevertheless. And he has, Optum is a hedgehog who knows one big thing. And Adapt is a fox who knows lots of little things and will jump around for whatever thing works right now. And what he says is the reason people don't solve wicked problems is because they're all trying to agree on the one fundamental thing. And they never will. But if you set it aside and just find little practical things that you can agree on that you need to do, that you can do. And if you respect each other, you can make progress. And that's how sustainability works. It's also how pluralistic liberal democracy has to work. Because we don't have a common vision of the good. And when we try to clamp one on to the nation, we get what a certain orange one is trying to do right now. He's not really doing that, but a lot of people who support him want to do that. And he will. Yeah, go ahead.
So, to your earlier statistic about the renewables in Pennsylvania, saying that they only attribute 7% of renewables to the energy, is your interpretation then that not that the renewables are ineffective, but more so that they're underinvested? That's why they're not accounting for more of the energy production?
Absolutely. PECO doesn't want to do it because in order to do it, they've got to buy long-term contracts because that's what supports the development of the renewables. And they want to be in this market that shifts all the time because they think that's the way they get the best price for their customers. That's the claim. And one of the things that power has done is to badger them and lean on them and push them until they finally agreed to buy a little tiny piece of long-term contracts, but it's a precedent. But yeah, and by the way, PECO just supplies mainly residential energy, and lots of buildings and companies and institutions, or rather organizations in the city do better than that. They invest, some of them even completely in renewables.
I want to ask you, you mentioned quickly, but seems you don't have time to discuss. But since you are here, I'd like to ask you, what's your list of environmental virtues, those character traits? In your study, your investigation, your book, How many you discuss?
It's not a complete list.
Oh, it's not complete.
I picked ones that were that just struck me as being really crucial, and I know others who have tried to make a systematic compendium of them, and that was not my intent. But here are the ones that I picked. They're environmental versions of the classic Greek 4. So that means moderation or self-control, which is a biggie. All this more, bigger, that business drives us toward and gets us to believe in. And courage, because it takes courage to stand up and to plunge forward into things that you don't know, and to resist, pressure from others, and justice, environmental justice, and
can you explain
what I
a
call
little more?
Critical
A
awareness.
little more on environmental justice.
I will. Let me finish the list because I have 2 more, or 5 more, depending how you count. There's specifically environmental virtues of biophilia, love for the environment, and care for and about it, and care for the future. Each of which faces challenges in terms of defining it and so on. And then I added on, just tagged on what are sometimes called the theological virtues, but I think that they can have non-theological versions of faith, hope, and love, because if we don't have those things, we're screwed. But and each of those virtues has I consider them in an individual and a collective form. That's my list. And the first 3, critical awareness is a form of practical wisdom, and courage and moderation get a chapter, and then environmental justice gets a chapter. And those other 2 each get a chapter.
Thank you. So you're it seems like much of the talk is focusing on sort of bottom-up forms of change. So sort of rewiring the network, partly because you're focusing on what we can do as individuals, right? Which sounds great, right? It also aligns with concerns we have about justice more broadly. But also, like, rewiring the network takes a long time. It's slow, right? It's like trying to get a ship to move or change direction, right? Sometimes I worry that because those modes of change align with other forms of justice we want, like political justice, I sometimes worry that we sort of, I don't know, just lean towards focusing on those. But on the other hand, like, against that, someone like China, which is not exactly a paragon of environmental or social justice, can do much more rapid change just because, right, and they've actually made more progress than us on all sorts of, despite many lingering problems. So when we focus in this way on that sort of bottom-up approach, are we missing something important? And given the scale of the crisis and how little time we have, what's the role of more sort of top-down and potentially more problematic forms of change in solving this crisis?
Well, I mean, we may be getting a dictator sometime soon. I hope we don't. Yes, part of the reason that China can make faster change, not all of it, but that it is a hierarchical system. And it's also a collectivist culture, where collective values are stronger. Not that individuality doesn't matter, but it leans toward the collective side, so that Chinese people, by and large, are very loyal to get on board with what the leader says they should do, mostly. There's protesting as well, and Charlie knows better than I. But it's obvious that China is able to make much quicker changes, although they've been getting into some trouble lately trying to do that with some things about real estate and so on. But yeah, and so, but the real answer to your question, I think, is just this, that the only thing that is ever really going to work has got to be something that all of us, or most of us, can buy into. And if you want democracy, then it has to be owned by the people. The great thing, the thing I like most about Brian Norton's approach is that he lays out how to negotiate when people have different fundamental positions. And that's, I spend a lot of time talking about that in terms of how pluralistic liberal democracy can work, because it has to be a rolling set of compromises. There is no theory. Rawls doesn't work, lots of other people have theories that they don't work. But compromising does work often, and sometimes it doesn't. And compromise works when people are willing to respect each other and not try to convert each other, and find things that they can do together, which means there's always a shifting set of alliances that we have to be in. And knowing that we're part of different groups can be an advantage, rather than just, oh, I'm being yanked this way, I'm being yanked that way, I don't have any autonomy. And integrity, the unity of your virtue and your character, is, I think, a process of pulling together all those disparate influences and what it is that you, by your experience, have learned that you want and love and believe in, until you can be more and more wise and consistent. But lots of little groups working at the same goal make progress faster than one big group. That's the research. I've read so much social science writing this book.
All right.
Thank you for your talk. And it seems like a lot of the younger generations, like people in maybe slightly older than me or in my generation or younger people, are almost giving up hope that it seems like this problem's way too big that it could ever be solved. But like, I'm just basically, I think I'm asking, like, what could I tell people, or maybe tell other people who say this, like, what is the light at the end of the tunnel in this? Like, once we get this going, will it grow exponentially to the point where we could fix it, or?
It is possible. And if you care about yourself and your descendants and the rest of life on the planet and the people you love, then not to do anything, if you could do something, is that's the cynic's response. The skeptic tests things. The cynic says, whatever. And you won't do anything if you do that. But you need to inspire people. And examples and stories really do inspire people. And the middle chapter of my book, because I just was not going to try tackling a theory of all the web of society in between governments, big businesses, and individuals. The middle chapter is stories. The first story is about Mondragon, but there's a story about an outfit called Isles in Trenton, which was started by a couple of people by some people who believed in sustainability and environmental justice, and learned to do that at Princeton, and they moved into Trenton to help. And that organization has continued to grow and done a whale of a lot of good in Trenton. And getting folks in the community making decisions and being part of the development and governance of the organization. There's a New Jersey Environmental Justice Association, which is a network of all kinds of environmental justice organizations in New Jersey. If you start looking, you find all kinds of things. The stories include a story about a young Muslim woman who is head of something called Green Muslims. And I interviewed her, wonderful person, former editor, but she's just so excited about bringing the principles of Islam and Islamic love for nature into this organization and working with children and adults and with various mosques, saying, Islam has environmentalism in it. Come on, let's do it. We've got there's a story about a black bird watcher. I learned about both these people at a CCL conference because they were presenting, who has organized freedom birding, following the path of the civil rights movement down into the South and bird watching along the way. Has a podcast. He's an amazing guy. Tucky James. And stories about people who do depolarization work and successes. So, it takes a while, and what inspires one person isn't going to inspire another. But there will be something right here. I mean, you're part of an organization and an institution, Rowan University and academia. What can you do here and now? How is Rowan's sustainability record? What are we doing? Even just, this is why I ran out at the beginning. How much water is in this bottle? Well, there's a couple, but actually, no. About 1.5 gallons that you don't see. Because that's how much water it takes to make the plastic in this thing. And when we're running out of fresh water, to be drinking 1.5 gallons plus 16, 17 ounces out of this every time for convenience you want to take a drink. Just know that you're doing it and stop it. Just stop it. Don't use them anymore. I know carrying a water bottle is a challenge. And you don't want to keep refilling these things because then the chemicals leak out into the water. There's all sorts of little, now again, the point is, if you are thinking of yourself individually, which we are programmed to do in this country, then you will think that you can't do anything. You will think your vote doesn't matter. You will think your little bit of recycling or whatever doesn't matter. And you won't take it seriously as a moral problem. Because whether or not you eat meat or whether or not you recycle or how many miles you drive, et cetera, those don't measure up in moral seriousness to, whether you're cheating on your partner or stealing money from your employer or shooting somebody in the street. It's only when you get the way the whole institution works that those horrible consequences happen. So to make a connection, recognizing that they really are serious and recognizing you're part of the network, then the question is, what's your way in to make a difference? And once you are serious about that, you'll find ways. But people have to want to do it. And I'll say this much too. At this stage in your lives, many of you. Nobody in the room is as old as I am. And most of you are quite a bit younger. But several of you are at the stage in your life where you don't yet have the strong bonds of particular relationships and particular jobs and particular places where you live and particular structured way of being in the world. And that is a amazingly wonderful time to seek out ways that you can be part of the change you want to see, not just in your individual life, but with others. Because to have something like Isles, to have something like Mondragon, to have something like the town of Dunn in Wisconsin, to have something like Sustainable South Bronx, to have any of those kind of places takes people together, each bringing what they can. And then, you go by yourself to meet a congressperson, good, they may listen. You go with a group and keep coming back every year and show that you know what they're up to and are grateful to them for certain things and care about some issues and respect them and observe the time limit, as I'm not doing.
Sorry, David. Yeah, pretty much. We all join me in thanking Professor Clowney for
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
You're